Hi, I'm Merle. I'm always late to any party ever. I want to do the book Postscript Tag, which was created 2 years ago by Memento Mori. Alright, so the first question is the longest book you read this year and the book that took you the longest to read. So I looked at my numbers and the longest book I read was Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell, which clocks in at almost 800 pages, so it's not the longest book ever, but it's quite a bit. I really enjoyed this one. So the thing with this is, it's unfinished, and you can tell because it ends rather abruptly. But by this time, you have already invested 800 pages. You are invested in the story. And that makes it really difficult to just end reading it. So I should tell you what this is about. So this book follows the girl Molly and her life in an English village in the Victorian age. That is the whole plot. So you really get to know the characters, and they grow on you because you're moving with them through their life. And like, technically it's a romance, it's set up as a romance, and at some point there would have been a wedding, but Elizabeth Gaskell didn't finish this book. And you feel kind of robbed for that, because you have gotten to know these people and maybe you feel friendly, and when you make it all through the 800 pages, you like them, you want to know how this ends. So having not really a planned out ending to this book, even though you know how it would have ended, but you're kind of betrayed because you don't get the journey to the end. So you got only half the journey, and the journey is the reason why you continue to read this book, not the ending. So that was a really interesting reading experience. This book did make my favorites list of 2020 because it gave me very many feelings, which basically is the reason why any book makes my favorite list. The book that took me the longest, actually next to this one, because I like Victorian writing, it takes me a long time to get through it. But the book that actually had the longest reading time for me was, wow, you can't see this, Maoism, A Global History by Lovell. And Lovell in this book's Lovell, English names, they are confusing. So she looks at Maoism as a global phenomenon. So it starts in China, it starts with Mao, but it looks at how the thoughts came to be that make up Maoism and how that is exported to other places in the world. So that was really interesting, but also quite dense to get through. And this book straddles the line between popular reading and academic reading, and I would actually say it's rather academic. So in order to understand a lot of the things, the context, you need to know about the historical context this book is placed in. And because it's a global history, it moves to very many places. And that made it quite hard to get through, but it was really interesting, and I learned a lot. It looks a lot at the connection between China and African countries, which is something that is a very timely thing today. So if you were curious to know more about that, it's a really good start. Question number 2 is a book you read in 2020 that was outside of your comfort zone. I didn't pick up any book with the intention to read out of my comfort zone last year because 2020 was outside of my comfort zone. But I did end up picking a book that was outside of my comfort zone, and I only found out while I was reading this, and this is William Darymple's The Anarchy. Okay, I picked this one up because I like history, obviously, and I wanted to know more about the connections between England and the sub-Indian continent, and how all of the whole colonial thing came to be. And this is a really good start because this book looks at the East Indian Company and how it came to be and how it became so powerful, and the whole concept of a company owning multiple countries at a point is just so... it's just so... So that's why I wanted to read this book, and it was on some price lists, so I gathered it might be a really nice start into the whole historical discussion. I read some reviews before I bought the book, and they pointed out that it is quite dense and academic, which I'm fine with. I'm used to reading academic texts. The thing I did not know was that this book, it kind of is a military history, and I mean, look at the cover. It has sepoys on the cover. I should have known, I should have guessed. It tells you on the cover that it focuses heavily focuses on the military side of history. I just didn't realize it, and I'm not that interested in it. I'm always there for the socio-economic and social-cultural perspective. And I'm telling you, in this book, in the pictures, there are more women in the pictures, like here, than in the text. Where are the women? Women were there. Also, if you write a military history. So that was outside of my personal comfort zone. It is still an interesting read. If you like military histories, please give it a try. The next question is, how many books did you reread in 2020? And I wrote my notes a week ago, and apparently I reread 7. I don't remember which books I reread though. 7 is really little, especially considering that in 2021, by this time while I'm filming this, I have already reread 5 books. So yay, go me! And my favorite reread of 2020 was The Borrowed by Ho-Kei. This is a detective novel set in Hong Kong, written by a Taiwanese author and translated from the Chinese by Jeremy Tiang. This is one of my favorite books for multiple reasons. For one, it's a really nice detective story. So it follows Inspector Kwon, who has been a detective in Hong Kong for the past 50 years, and you start with his last case, and then you move backwards in time. So you get like little short stories, detective short stories, moving back into time. I think 7 or 8 altogether. I don't know, maybe I'm lying. 6. And the thing I really truly enjoyed with this book is that it has a really strong sense of place. For me, it really invokes Hong Kong as a city, as a place. And I could see myself walking through Hong Kong reading this book. I am heartbroken that there are only 2 translations of his novels. I do not know when the next one is coming out. My Chinese is not good enough to read it. I decided to reread this book. Also his second translation came out I think last year, and I immediately bought it, and I think I decided to reread this one before I read the second novel, even though they are not connected. The book you read for the first time and that you look forward to rereading in the future. For this I chose the collected works of Mascha Kaléko. She was a poet, and she started writing in the 1930s, and a lot of her life was influenced by the fact that she had to emigrate. She had to flee Germany, and that did something to her, and she never truly connected to the English language. So a lot of her early work is what speaks to me, and then you can see in her work that at later times she wasn't really up to writing in the same way. So she chose to write a lot of children's poems. My personal favorites are her chansons that she wrote, and that there's a Berlin-based musician who set quite some of them into music last year, I think, or the year before. I will link the information down below so you can check that out. And I just know that I will return to Mascha Kaléko quite many times over the next years. Single short story or novella that I read in 2020. Last year I picked up N.K. Jemesin. I'm not really one for science fiction, so that is why N.K. Jemesin is just not on my I have to read it right now list. But I wanted to get to know Afrofuturism as a genre. It's very interesting what is happening, like from an artist point of view. And then I decided to get her short story collection, and unsurprisingly I loved the speculative historical fiction a lot more than the pure science fiction stories. But there's this one story that I read, and I kind of need a full novel of that in my life. So that one would be The Effluent Engine, and that is a short story set in an alternative New Orleans, and it follows 2 girls, one who lives in New Orleans and one who turns out to be a Haitian spy. I mean, if that premise wasn't the best one ever, I wouldn't know. So I truly enjoyed that short story. All in all, this collection was really great. I think I gave it 4 stars, and I don't like science fiction, but I do like N.K. Jemisin's writings. I most probably will pick up her science fiction books at some point. Question number 7. Mass appeal, a book you liked and would recommend to a wide variety of readers. For this I chose The Ghost Bride by Yangsze, Choo. It's not my favorite book, and I think personally I actually do prefer The Night Tiger, his second novel. But I do think that this one offers something for a lot of readers. So I think it straddles the genre line between young adult and general fiction quite well. So if you want to dip into one of those genres, I think it might be for you. It does have a romance, which is probably appealing to a lot of people, but it doesn't focus solely on the romance. And I think Yangsze Choo does a really interesting thing with incorporating mythical elements from Chinese afterlife. So the premise is that Li Lan is supposed to get married to a boy who just died. That's basically the premise. I mean, she doesn't really want to. You can imagine why. And it goes from there. And so this book offers you quite an insight into mythological backgrounds that you've maybe never heard of before, or that you have heard of before but have never seen reflected in a book. Specialized appeal, a book you liked but would be hesitant to recommend to just anyone. So now here we come to the whole booktube in English thing, because obviously I'm not a native speaker. And I also read a lot of not a lot, I try to read more in my native language, which is German, and I ended up picking up this non-fiction book which focuses on the suffragette movement in Germany in the beginning of the 20th century. And I imagine that might be a niche subject, but if you're interested in it, be it because you are German or because you're interested in the suffragette movement in an international context, and if you can read German, then I would highly recommend you to read this book. And it focuses a lot on the circle of women fighting for or working for the right to vote in Munich. And it focuses a lot on the academic women with money, basically. So it doesn't look into the working people, which is missing in this book. It truly is missing. But it is great for what it does, because it looks at the writings and it looks at the academic circles and the discussion groups that were going on. I thought it was really interesting to read it, but I also see that it is very niche to read about. I will put all the questions down below, and thank you for watching. And please tell me if I made you want to pick up one of the books that I talked about. See you in the next one.